So that's triangle is the current system. We're trying to invert that triangle by really narrowing the funnel of people into incarceration by decriminalizing and addressing overcriminalization, but also importantly, really expanding the infrastructure for alternatives to incarceration, things like treatment, behavioral health, sustainable housing, all of the things that we know keep people out of incarceration. And then we're trying to expand the way out of prison. So really increasing parole, increasing earned time credits, and just generally not sending people away for that long.
Welcome to episode 49 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact. Today's episode features Ana Zamora, founder and CEO of the Just Trust, a fund that is 100% dedicated to criminal justice reform. Ana has been working in criminal justice advocacy for nearly 20 years, including at the ACLU and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Ana and I discuss her career journey, how she was drawn into the cause, and how she's ended up going further than she even could have dreamt. Her work is so deeply impactful for the future of our nation and beyond. Here is Ana Zamora on People Are the Answer. Ana, thanks so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's absolutely an honor. I love your work. I'm excited to dig in. Can you just start off by telling us who you are, where you're based, and what your current role is?
You bet. So my name is Ana Zamora, and I am the proud founder and CEO of the Just Trust, which I'm sure I'll tell you a lot more about later. But I am currently at home in Asheville, North Carolina, where I live with my wife and stepdaughter and my dog, Blueberry.
Love that. I'm very glad that you included your dog. That always makes me happy. And Blueberry is an awesome name. So where did you grow up and what was it like there?
Yeah, so I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and I was born in Portland, Oregon, and lived there until I was 18 years old. And my family actually moved to the States from Costa Rica a couple of years before I was born. And the reason they moved up is when I have two older brothers, and one of my brothers, the middle brother, he was born with a really rare and significant heart defect. And the doctors in Costa Rica told my parents that he probably wasn't going to survive beyond a couple of years. And so my family, was kind of forced to move to the United States to get a different kind of care for this little baby that had this really horrible and rare heart condition. And so that's why my family moved to the States, and they moved to the States a couple of years before I was born. And my mom is originally from the States, so they ended up going back to Oregon, where she's from. And they moved to a little suburb of Portland called Lake Oswego. Now, Lake Oswego is pretty notorious for being very white and more on the affluent side. And I think that while it was a fine place to grow up, certainly it was safe and all that, great schools, I always felt a little different and like my family stood out. And in fact, when my family first moved to Lake Oswego, Oregon, before I was born, my brothers were in grade school. My oldest brother was, I believe, in kindergarten or first grade. And they didn't speak English. And so they were in, the ESL program, and they were bullied a lot, especially my older brother. He encountered significant bullying. And that really impacted him, I think, for a long time. And then my father, who was a very well-educated, brilliant man. I think my father is one of the smartest people I've ever met. He was an agronomist, so he studied and was an expert in agriculture and economics and the intersection of those. And he worked for the United Nations. He worked for the government of Costa Rica, helping diversify crops in Costa Rica. He brought pine, he brought macadamia nuts, tilapia fish to the country. So he was really brilliant. But yet, when he moved to the United States, nobody would take him seriously, and he could not get a job for the life of him. He had a very thick accent, and he didn't certainly didn't look like a white man. And my dad was very proud, and so this was very hard on him. And he ended up getting a job driving a lift truck in a warehouse at a paper company. And I think that that was a big hit on his pride, but yet he pushed forward. And 30 years later, this paper company in Portland, Oregon, ended up getting acquired by Georgia Pacific. And he ended up retiring from that company, from Georgia Pacific, as the director of IT for that office. And so
Wow.
my experience growing up was always feeling a little different, being aware of the struggles that my father and my brothers had when they first moved to the country, but it not really being talked about. But always feeling a little different. But because of my father's history and his struggles, he taught me to work really hard. And he taught me that nobody was ever going to give me anything, that I would have to prove myself. And so I've carried those values throughout my career.
Yeah, it's clear that those stuck with you, and it's cool to hear how he was able to, find his way up to a really awesome role, and sounds like an incredible human being.
Yeah, he certainly was.
So it's this already sort of came up in that story that you told, but are there any significant experiences or an experience from childhood that you really thought showed you the importance of giving back and stuck with you?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot, but I would say both of my parents in their careers really taught me the value of giving back. For one, my father, in when he was in Costa Rica, he really dedicated his life to improving the circumstances for other folks. He really was passionate. The reason he got into agriculture and economics was because he saw the campesinos, the farmers in Costa Rica, really, really struggling to grow crops and struggling with finances, and really being held down as a result of limited opportunities. And so he was really passionate about helping the campesinos diversify their crops and introduce new things to farm and new sources of revenue, so that they could improve their lives and the lives of their families. He was actually once called a socialist, which might not be funny unless you know my father, because my father, when he moved to this country, he was a diehard Republican, and very much anti-socialist, all of that stuff. And he became a citizen of this country in the Reagan administration. And I remember growing up, and in his office, he had a huge poster of Ronald Reagan, and we kind of joked that we had to worship at the altar of Reagan, because my father loved Ronald Reagan so much and was such a diehard Republican. But in a previous life in Costa Rica, he dedicated his expertise and his knowledge to helping, poor farmers get a leg up. So I learned that from him. And then on my mom's side, my mom was a healthcare professional. She was a registered nurse for many, many years. So very passionate about helping folks through illness. But later in her career, she transitioned into health policy, and she was actually one of the people who helped kind of engineer and envision the Oregon Health Plan. And so my mom firmly believed that access to quality healthcare was in fact a human right. And so she taught me the value of helping people through healthcare and access to healthcare. So both my parents, they're incredible people. And I think it was just ingrained in their careers that helping people is really important, and certainly passed that value to me.
Yeah, it sounds like you had some great role models. And I sometimes mention on these episodes that innovators in impact tend to have really awesome parents, or they overcame not having really awesome parents.
Absolutely.
It sounds like you got some great ones, and certainly set you on a good path. And I saw that you went to Mills College. How was that experience?
It was great. It's funny. My pathway to Mills was because when I was 18 years old and graduating from high school in Portland, Oregon, I did not think anything of criminal justice reform at that time. I was very narrowly focused on being an actor in New York. I was very, very passionate about theater and acting. And so, actually, at 18, I moved to New York to pursue the dream of being an actor. That did not go super well. And I spent a year in New York exploring that and had a lot of fun. But I think in my year in New York, which was my first year, not living at home, I think I was coming into my own, and I was starting to learn more about the world and about, all of the various things that oppression and injustice and all these things, as a young person. And so I kind of wanted to get involved and learn more. And that sparked my pathway to Mills College. I had gone to the all girls Catholic high school in Portland. And so I got a lot out of going to high school in an all girls environment. And so I kind of was drawn to Mills College in the Bay Area, which I knew was an epicenter for things like social justice, and I really craved going back into an all women's institution to finish out my undergraduate degree. So that's what drove me to Mills, and I loved going to Mills, and I loved being in the Bay Area. But it wasn't until after college that my criminal justice reform focus actually came to fruition, believe it or not. During Mills, I was just absorbing information and learning about all sorts of things, but I didn't yet have a passion kind of nailed down.
Got it. That is really interesting to hear that you weren't there yet, but it's not surprising. I feel like a lot of people don't know exactly what they want to do at that age. But then you ended up in working at the California Appellate Project.
Yes, yes. So that, yeah. Okay. I wish I had some really great story. I just literally needed a job after I graduated from college. I don't know if you know this, but living in the Bay Area is very expensive. So I graduated from Mills College, and I still had no idea, to your point, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up, and let alone how to even do it. I had worked throughout college, of course, but I didn't know how to build a career. So I literally just needed a job, and I applied for a job as an administrative assistant at this organization called the California Appellate Project. I had no idea really what it did or what being an administrative assistant was, but God love them, they hired me, and I was immediately thrown into the world of the criminal justice system.
And
So
just
the
for our
yeah.
listeners, it sounds like you're about to tell us what the California Appellate Project is.
Yes, yes. So the California Appellate Project is one of three California organizations that handle death row appeals. So it's called post conviction death penalty legal proceedings. So it's a law firm, and I supported lawyers that were handling the appeals of folks on death row in California. So talk about a smack in the face. I mean, my entry point into learning and understanding the criminal justice system was by way of our country's most extreme punishment, which is, of course, execution by the state, by government. And of course, it also dealt with, what most people think are some of the most horrific crimes, right? We're talking about people who commit murder. So it was a whirlwind, and I was literally thrown into a deep journey of understanding the underbelly of the criminal justice system in America. And man, oh man, it was a hard realization to learn everything, to learn about the horrific facts of some of these crimes. But also the opposite side of that was to learn about the horrific experiences that nearly all of the individuals facing death in California endured starting as children. And so I started to see just a lot. And the more I learned and the more I engaged, it became clear to me that I wanted to change this. This was not right. This was not the United States that my family moved to. This was not the United States that I thought it was. That there was something really, really rotten and really, really wrong in the criminal justice system, in how we address crime, how we address harm, and so it's like it hooked me in immediately, and I knew that this is what I wanted to dedicate my life to.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Just learning about the atrocities within the system is really motivating to try to help create change. Um, and so, within that, once you spent some time in that initial position, is that when you were just set, I have to change this?
Yeah, it really was. I learned so much. I learned about our criminal laws, and I was like, they didn't really make sense to me. The whole legal process around death penalty appeals was just a complicated mess. And also, I just really started to question, I'm like, what are we doing any of this for? It really feels like we are punishing for punishment's sake. And as I dove into the research more and really truly understood kind of the evidence base behind the criminal justice system, the justification for punishment, incarceration, execution, I saw no correlation to anything except for punishment's sake. I didn't see it providing healing to murder victim family members or survivors of crime who I worked with very closely. I certainly didn't see our prison system offer any rehabilitation or any help for people to get better. I started to understand the kind of decades of criminalization, of increasing penalties and making more things crimes, starting back in the Nixon administration. I just saw a proliferation of laws that seemed really backwards to me. And again, at the end of all of that system of inhumanity, that system of mass incarceration, of overcriminalization, I saw it really only point to one goal, which was punishment. And I started to really question why. Why are we doing all this? Why are we spending so much money and causing so much suffering and so much devastation to so many communities, and particular communities at that, primarily communities of color and poor communities in this country? For what purpose? To satisfy some feeling of retribution that we have been told that we need. And so I was like, this is not okay. And that's when I kind of transitioned from working on doing legal work with these lawyers at the California Appellate Project, these brilliant lawyers, by the way. I started to see that what I wanted to actually do is scale impact and actually work on the policy side, the policy and advocacy side of this issue. So not focusing so much on individual cases anymore, but really transitioning to scrutinizing our laws and the proliferation of laws that have landed us in this place of mass incarceration. And so I was like, that's what I want to do.
It must have been nice to have sort of that realization. And it looks like you started off working on getting rid of the death penalty in California.
Yes. So while I was at the California Appellate Project, I met one of many mentors in my life, a woman by the name of Natasha Minsker, who's now a dear friend. I learned so much from her. She was the death penalty policy director at the time at the ACLU of Northern California. And she hired me to be her policy assistant. And together, we really started to think about ending the death penalty in California, which is a very audacious thing to do. It's a big state. It had still has, I believe, the largest death row in the country, and sentenced a lot of people to death row every year. So it was a big thing that we were trying to tackle. Even more challenging is the fact that in California, to end the death penalty, you had to do it by a vote of the people. It was not something you could do in the legislature. It had to be by a vote of the people. So we needed to utilize the citizen-initiated ballot measure process in California to try to end the death penalty. And so we set out to do that. which required years of planning and organizing and building coalition and strategizing about how we were going to get to one moment where the voters of California were going to cast a vote to say whether or not they wanted to keep the death penalty. So that's what started my trajectory at the ACLU. But I was there for over 10 years, and I went from policy assistant to, when I left the ACLU, I was the criminal justice director. And so throughout my journey at the ACLU, I kind of started with a narrow focus on the death penalty, but quickly broadened to really the full scope of criminal justice reform, which is a enormous body of work and advocacy work and policy work that we actually need to tackle if we're going to try to transform our justice system in America. And so I really learned about the vastness of all the work that needed to be done, but I also learned about all of the various strategies. I learned what integrated advocacy is and all of the different levers that you need to pull that in order to actually make criminal justice reform viable and possible.
Yeah, there certainly are a lot of nuances to getting what's right done, or at least getting us closer to what's right. It sounds like you learned a lot of that during that experience, and it sounds absolutely invaluable. And to rise to director of criminal justice reform, that's incredible at the ACLU.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, are there any specific things or accomplishments during your time there that you were most proud of or you felt were most impactful?
Yeah, I would say that there's a couple of accomplishments. So number one, I learned a lot of really important lessons through my journey at the ACLU. One that comes to mind, and then I'll tell you about a specific accomplishment that I'm particularly proud of. But one that comes to mind is the I hate to say value, the reality of losing. And I say that because in 2012, we put forward to the voters of California a ballot measure to repeal the death penalty. That was Proposition 34. I served as the deputy campaign manager for that effort. It was a massive effort. We lost by less than 2% of the vote, which was a painful loss. I mean, I am not much of a crier, and I will tell you, Jeff, I cried and cried and cried after that. And then a couple of years later in 2016, to add insult to injury, our opponents, the folks that really wanted to keep the death penalty in California, put forward another ballot measure in the state, this time to speed up the death penalty and to resume executions. And it was a terribly, terribly flawed ballot measure and, deeply disturbing to me. And I signed up to lead the no on this was Proposition 66. I signed up to lead the campaign against Prop 66. So I was the campaign manager for no on 66. And that too was a painful loss. I lost that. We were not able to defeat Proposition 66. We lost by 1% of it won by 1% of the vote. And so that, again, crying, lots of like soul searching after that.
Can I briefly ask, if I can, who are these people? What groups want the death penalty and want it to happen faster?
So I think it's really important, and this is something I really, really believe. There's a lot of different, humans are not a monolith, right? There's different sets of values that we all live by, different mindsets that we all live by. And some of us have a mindset that is focused on punishment and retribution. That's where retribution comes from, humans, right? It's the idea of just desserts, right? When somebody harms somebody, the only way to restore the community is to deliver an equal punishment, right? A lot of people believe that. They truly believe that in their heart of hearts. It is their mindset in the world. It's their worldview. I think that that's about 25% of the public. Um, the rest of the public believes and have different mindsets. They believe in things like healing and repair and redemption and all those other values. Um, but there are folks that truly believe that an eye for an eye is the only appropriate remedy for harm. And for far too long, our entire criminal justice system has been set up with that mindset front and center. And I believe that the future requires us to acknowledge that there's a lot of other mindsets out there that people live by and believe that do not align with an eye for an eye, and in fact align with healing and restoration and redemption and human dignity. And what I'm trying to do in my work is let's build a justice system that is governed by those principles rather than the principles of punishment and redemption.
No, you really explained that well, and I think you put it into great perspective for the people listening. Um, and you mentioned that really narrow, painful loss in 2016, and where did you go from there?
Yeah, so I mean, the what I learned in Prop 34 and Prop 66 is that in our journey to shift society for social justice, we're loss is inevitable, failure is inevitable. It is part of social change. And what we have to do is not see failures and losses like I experienced with Proposition 34 and Proposition 66, not as indicators that we're on the wrong track. Rather, we need to learn from those and continue to make progress and shift our strategies and tactics accordingly. So, in the long term, while we failed to end the death penalty via Prop 34, and we failed to defeat Prop 66 that sought to resume and speed up executions, the reality is California has never had an execution since a long time ago, and that currently there is a moratorium on executions in place in the state. So again, while those were major losses and I felt them, they were part of the right trajectory towards justice reform.
Got it. And what do you feel led to that moratorium?
Well, a lot, years and years of work
Yeah, of
by
course.
incredible advocates
Yeah,
and leadership.
yeah.
It required governors that were really willing to step out and say that something is wrong here and we have to do something better. And Governor Newsom finally implemented that moratorium.
Well, I'm glad to hear that at least, things moved in the right direction. Fortunately, we've tended to do that as a society, but occasionally we take a wrong turn. But uh, thank you for your work on this progress and pushing it forward. And one thing I wanted to ask about that I saw when at your time at the ACLU was this Meet Your DA program. And I've become over the last year or so just really interested in the role of the prosecutor in how our criminal justice system currently operates and the outcomes that we're having. So I'm curious where this concept came from.
Yeah, something I'm really proud of. So the origin of the Meet Your DA campaign really came um, at a time when we were really unable to move a whole lot of criminal justice reform legislation in California. We were kind of, we just really weren't able to gain traction. We would introduce bills and they maybe passed through committee, but they were just like, we weren't moving them. And we took a beat and we're like, why, what is happening here? What is the roadblock? Why can't we move this forward? And we know politics are an issue. We know all the things, but we're like, there's something else stopping this. And rather than continuing to beat our heads against the wall and just continue to introduce legislation that goes nowhere, let's scrutinize the situation a little bit. And when we did that, what we realized is that there was kind of a more quiet opposition, which was California's elected district attorneys, that they were really very influential in the legislature and kind of single-handedly reaching out to legislators and stopping the progress of these bills moving forward that we were introducing. And so we're like, okay, prosecutors are a major hurdle for us. What are we going to do about it? Then we realized, duh, prosecutors are elected officials, just like all these legislators are. And we started looking into their elections, and we realized a couple of really important things. Number one, the vast majority of prosecutors in California were running for reelection year after year unopposed. Nobody was challenging them. And there was another kind of terrible trend that we saw, which was when an elected prosecutor was ready to move on and retire, they would announce their retirement in the middle of their term, and they would essentially pass the baton to their second in command to serve as interim district attorney for the rest of their term, putting that individual in a very strong place to be elected at the next election. And so it's just like this, this constant, story where the same values, the same approach, which tended to be tough on crime and very punitive, was just continuing on. And the voters were not, they didn't know, and they had no say. So that was kind of thing one.
Yeah, they're oblivious.
Yeah. And then thing two, speaking of voters, we realized that voters have no idea what their district attorney does. They don't even know who their district attorney is. And they really had no idea that they actually vote to choose their district attorney. And importantly, they had no idea about the vast power that district attorneys have over our lives. And I argue that district attorneys actually have more power over our lives than the president does. There's a direct line, right? And so we're like, oh, here's our opportunity to start to shift to essentially minimize what is a very entrenched opposition in the legislature, preventing us from moving sensible criminal justice reforms forward. The Meet Your DA campaign was specifically about working to minimize and reduce that opposition by engaging the voters to participate in the election of their district attorneys. And so that's where Meet Your DA came from. We're literally like, all we're asking you to do, people of California, is meet your DA and ask them, are they representing you? Because their job as elected officials is to represent you. This is what they're doing. These are the actions they're taking. Are they representing your beliefs and what you want them to do? And so that really shot up to the stage what is now a really, really robust national strategy that focuses on prosecutorial accountability and prosecutorial reform. Our mission was to let prosecutors in California know that their constituents, their voters, were paying attention to what they were doing, and that their voters actually support criminal justice reform. So we started it out really as a specific campaign with a goal to reduce opposition for legislative advocacy. But now it has really transformed into this new idea that actually prosecutors don't have to they can use their power and their discretion to advance justice reforms rather than continuing to serve as primary opponents to justice reform and proponents to tough on crime and regressive policies.
Well, that truly is transformative, and really awesome to hear that you guys sort of got that going, and something that'll continue to impact us on an ongoing basis, and excited to hear that that effort has expanded nationally. So that was in 2017, I believe. And then in 2018, you transitioned to focusing on criminal justice from a philanthropic angle.
Yes. Yeah. So during my time at the ACLU, I not only learned a lot about criminal justice reform, and I learned about the criminal justice system, and I learned about advocacy tactics, and I really started to form an opinion on how social change happens in this space. I also learned a lot about philanthropy, and I was very fortunate to work at the ACLU. The ACLU is a very well-resourced organization. But part of what I knew was a secret ingredient to durable change on criminal justice reform was building broad coalitions, building unlikely coalitions in particular, and really engaging and listening to people who are directly impacted. And I was very fortunate in my job at the ACLU to engage with a ton of local organizations throughout California that were led by formerly incarcerated leaders who had the best ideas. I mean, the best ideas. I think we're often taught that like lawyers and academics have the best ideas for criminal justice reform, and I disagree. They're important part of the equation, but we actually have to listen to people who have lived and breathed this system. And I started to really work a lot more with these leaders and understand not only their perspective and their ideas, but I also understood a really important thing, which was they couldn't get funding. While the ACLU was able to get funding, while I was able to get funding because I worked at the ACLU, they were not able to get funding. They were not able to attract the big funders in the way that institutions like the ACLU were. And I was like, why is this? This has to change. This is not, we're never going to achieve true transformation of the criminal justice system in America if groups like this cannot get funded and be part and sit at the table. And so that was the first thing. The second thing was my experience with Prop 66, actually. When Prop 66 came online, when, again, people who wanted to speed up and resume executions in California put forward a ballot measure, I took it very seriously. I knew from my years of research, public opinion research, and my deep understanding of the death penalty that effort was something that we needed to take seriously. I thought it very well could pass. And that's why I signed up to be the campaign manager for the opposition campaign. And I set out to raise funds. In California, you can't work on a ballot measure without significant resourcing, millions and millions of dollars to run a campaign. It's just the nature of the beast. So I set out to raise money, and every single funder and donor that I talked to, they didn't take me seriously. They're like, there's no way liberal California voters would vote to speed up and resume executions. And they just didn't. And I presented evidence to the contrary. But they just didn't believe it. And I think part of that was philanthropy doesn't like to fund opposition campaigns. They like to fund exciting big things that are moving the ball forward. They like to fund wins. They don't see defeating a bad bill as a win. I see it as a huge win. I also see it as super important. So that experience, I wasn't able to raise very much money, which I think absolutely contributed to not being able to defeat Proposition 66. And so it was a combination of realizing that the philanthropy industry that supports criminal justice reform is unwilling to invest in directly impacted leaders and unwilling to invest in the hard but important work of making sure we don't slide backwards. I was like, I got to change this if we're going to actually make progress. And so that's when I was like, I'm going to be a funder. I'm going to go make decisions about who gets funded and how much and for what. And I was like, someday I'm going to be the largest funder of criminal justice reform in this country. And I tend to set audacious goals for myself.
I like it.
And around that time, the Chan Zuckerberg initiative was kind of coming online. And they were focused on tackling really meaty issues in the realm of science and in education. And I started to hear that they were also really, really interested in advocacy, in particular, advocacy issues that really could prove and show what bipartisanship looks like, what working across the aisle and making progress together looks like. And criminal justice reform was one of the issues that they were interested in exploring. And I signed up and they hired me to build their criminal justice program, investment program. And so I did that. And I built an investment strategy and a theory of change that was deeply rooted in my years of doing this work as an advocate, and my years of exploring all of the different advocacy tactics, from legislative advocacy to organizing to research, public opinion research, to policy analysis, ballot measure work, of course, and then my work focused on prosecutors and prosecutor elections. And I was able to kind of harness all of that experience and build an investment portfolio at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative that I felt could really scale change and paint an accurate picture of what impact and progress looks like on an issue like criminal justice reform, an issue that is 40 years in the making and is going to take a long time to undo and unravel. And it requires philanthropic investment through and through.
It must have been empowering to have that backing and be able to do all of this creation of systems and investing and really start moving the needle even more so than prior. And I imagine that was just exciting.
Yeah, it was very exciting. And, I also had the privilege of working at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which was a foundation that was very different. It was a foundation and a set of leaders that were willing to get their hands dirty and engage in advocacy and deploy. They allowed me to deploy resources that can be used for advocacy related and direct lobbying and ballot measure support. And so I was at CZI for 3 years, and over those 3 years, I was able to invest those resources and make grants toward the things that really initially drove me to philanthropy. Things like advocacy infrastructure and making sure we have strong organizations that include directly impacted leaders, but also include the full range of political ideology. I got to fund in places like Kentucky and other places that are usually kind of forgotten by philanthropy on this issue. I got to fund ballot measure campaigns and make some risky bets on some bold efforts. So that was all of a sudden I was like, philanthropy is a key ingredient in our ability to make progress on this issue. And I feel like I started to prove that at CZI.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Yeah, it's really great to see the kind of impact that you could have in that role. And then what took you from CZI to starting the Just Trust?
So honestly, it was 100%, it was the leadership of the CZI founders, Dr. Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg, and their commitment to criminal justice reform. After 3 years of building the program at CZI, they went on a journey with me to really learn and understand what needed to happen in order to truly transform the justice system in America. And they learned that it required sustained investment. It required strong advocacy ecosystems in every single state. It required audacious campaigns and the funding to back those campaigns. And it required true transpartisanship, bipartisanship, whatever. It required that we can move this issue forward and make progress on this issue no matter who holds political power. And what I like to say is, it is our responsibility as funders and criminal justice advocates to ensure that we can continue to make progress on this issue, no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in the governor's mansions, and no matter who has control of the state houses. We cannot only make progress if one party is in power. It's not gonna work. And so after 3 years of going on a journey together on criminal justice reform, I think that the leadership of CZI realized a couple of really important things. Number one, that we needed to ensure that there was sustained and robust funding for justice reform advocacy for a long time, and that trajectory of funding, that assured funding, did not exist currently. And number two, that they were ready to take a leadership role and make a historic commitment to criminal justice reform. And so in the beginning of 2021, they announced that historic investment. They announced a $350 million commitment to criminal justice reform advocacy. And importantly, they wanted me to spin my program out of CZI and establish an independent organization that they would invest that $350 million on and allow me to deploy those resources toward the theory of change I had really built at CZI, the investment strategy, but importantly, scale those resources so that I could create that philanthropic backbone for criminal justice reform to ensure that there was sustainable and robust funding now and into the future. And so part of the reason why they wanted to do this is they realized that while $350 million is a mind-blowing and incredible contribution to this and dedication to this issue, the reality is that was a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of money that we spend every year to lift up the current system, criminal justice system, that of course punishes and incapacitates. We spend $81 billion a year on our current system, and they were investing $350 million to transform it. We needed to massively scale those resources in order to achieve our long-term goals. And so they asked me, spin my program out. We're going to invest this money in you. You're going to have the independence to make decisions about what to do with it and how to scale it by attracting other donors and other investors that want to join CZI and invest in the Just Trust, which is my organization, and our theory of change to scale impact across the country.
Wow, it's really incredible. I mean, it must be a dream come true to be running such an organization.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if dream come true really accurately describes it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I still can't really believe it. It's such, it's such a dream come true to have these kinds of resources, and to have a really clear picture of what I want to do with them. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of, this is hard. This is not easy work.
Yeah. Of course.
But I have a very clear vision of what needs to happen with these resources. And I got to start an organization. I mean, how cool is that? I never in my life thought that I would be in a position to really sit down and think about how do I both make impact with these resources towards my life's work, but also create and build an organization that is a great place to work and build a team from scratch and to build systems and operations from scratch. So on one hand, I feel like this dream come true has allowed me to double down on my life's passion, criminal justice reform. But it's also allowed me to really think about and build an organization that I truly want to work at every single day, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost coming full circle in terms of, you had that at the ACLU, this organization that you felt really good about working with and getting a lot done, and now you're giving that opportunity to others. So now you're about 2 years in. How is it going? What's your team like? Where are you guys?
I'm very, very proud of my team. So we are a fully remote team. So we're all over the country. We have staff in California, in New York, in Massachusetts, in Texas, North Carolina. There's a couple of us in North Carolina. And we have a really, I would say we officially launched the organization a couple of months after that January 2021 announcement. So we kind of launched to the public in September of 2021. So we built quickly.
Wow.
And then we made our first grants in March of 2022. So March of 2022 was the first time we deployed resources into the field. And so in a lot of ways, 2022, last year, was our first year operating. And we really focused, our priority for that year was to build our team, because I didn't have any staff. It's a lot of money to move without people and systems to do it. So it took some time to build all this. But in 2022, we deployed resources toward our theory of change. And I just want to take a second to talk about our North Star goals at the Just Trust. So we kind of have a vision for what a transformed engine of public safety looks like, which is what we're trying to do. And that really comes from this idea, and it's helpful, I think, a little visual. If I had a board, I would draw it. But our current criminal justice system is shaped kind of like a triangle, right? Where the triangle, the base of the triangle, is the inside the prison. There's a huge base funneling people inside incarceration. And then the point reflects the fact that there's a very small outlet out of prison. So we criminalize a lot of things, and we don't offer a lot of alternatives to incarceration. So a lot of people are going into the system. And then because our laws are so punitive, people stay there for a very, very long time, too long, and there's not a whole lot of opportunities to get out. So that's triangle is the current system. We're trying to invert that triangle by really narrowing the funnel of people into incarceration by decriminalizing and addressing overcriminalization, but also importantly, really expanding the infrastructure for alternatives to incarceration, things like treatment, behavioral health, sustainable housing, all of the things that we know keep people out of incarceration. And then we're trying to expand the way out of prison. So really increasing parole, increasing earned time credits, and just generally not sending people away for that long. So that's what we're trying to do. And that kind of picture is aligned around our 4 North Star goals, which are shrinking the overall footprint of the criminal justice system. So that's that inverted triangle. Centering safety and prevention. So safety is a very important part. We want our justice system we want the goal to move from punishment to safety. And so that's a really important North Star goal for us. We want the system to be humane and dignified and lift up human grace. That goes back to what I said at the very beginning and my belief in people. And then third, we want to further alternatives that address further alternatives to incarceration, So really, again, build out that infrastructure. So that's our kind of North Star goals. And how we do that is a combination of what we say money out and money in. So we make grants toward a theory of change that starts first with the acknowledgement that in order to achieve that vision, those North Star goals, we need to have strong advocacy ecosystems in every single state in the country. Because what's contributing, one of the primary things that's contributing to the current triangle is our criminal laws and the policies that govern our justice system. And every single state has a unique set of laws that contribute to mass incarceration. So in order for us to start tackling that, we need to work state by state, and we need to have strong advocacy ecosystems in every state helping to make that change. So that's the first thing. We fund state advocacy ecosystems. We also believe we need to have a really robust national advocacy ecosystem, organizations that work kind of across the United States on these issues that really reflect the diversity of thought on justice reform. So we fund those national organizations as well. So that's kind of the base, is what we say advocacy ecosystem infrastructure. And then we come in and we fund campaigns, we fund journalism and narrative, and we fund what we call alternatives. Our Safer Communities Accelerator really is tackling this idea that we need to really build and lift up the infrastructure for alternatives to incarceration. So that's kind of a very broad overview of how we invest resources. And that's our money outside. So that's our grant making side. The other side of the Just Trust is what we call our money inside. And that is our work to align and scale resources for criminal justice reform now and into the long term, and to really engage and align with other folks who want to invest in justice reform. We help them understand the ecosystem and help them kind of make investments, and also encourage them to invest in us so we can deploy those resources toward our theory of change.
Got it. Well, I think you spelled out the simple version of the vision beautifully, and it's a huge undertaking that you very much are, you know, equipped to take on. And as someone that is really interested in criminal justice reform, it is especially exciting to have you at the helm of these resources. So thank you for all that you're doing to put in place for the long term. It's so important to think that way. And for me, a big part of it when I look at our detention system is we need to change the incentive model. How do we start truly incentivizing the people that are running these facilities to rehab people and get them out and successful, and get rid of their recidivism?
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you mentioned people that work in these systems and thinking about different incentives and structures that can help kind of us transition from punishment for punishment's sake to healing, restoration, and support, right? Which I think will actually lead to safer communities. But there's also we also have to acknowledge that folks working within this system that punishes for punish's sake are experience a horrible work environment. We have a lot of civil servants in this country that work in the correction system, that work in the policing system, that work in prosecutors' offices, etc., that work in public defenders' offices too, that are experiencing the dysfunction and devastation that our current system, it doles out. And I think we often forget about the experience of those working within this system, and we fail to actually ask them, what do you think will improve safety? What do you think will help people get better? And I think that they have a lot of things to say. I've been very privileged in my career to work with a lot of corrections and law enforcement who have really important viewpoints on how we can transform the system. And often those opinions are kind of overshadowed by what is otherwise a very loud chorus of, law enforcement and corrections opinions that are saying punishment, 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 tough on crime. There's a lot of folks out there, particularly in corrections, that I think we ought to listen to. And certainly folks in corrections are experiencing horrific working conditions that should not be tolerated.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of work to do there, but the voices of those directly involved should ring louder than they currently do. And you've mentioned a variety of different types of organizations that you work with. Do you have any specific examples that you can share with us about organizations you work with?
Yeah, well, we are funding around 100 organizations, so we're not a small grant making shop. I want to point out, so I mentioned state advocacy and my vision, like in 10 years, Jeff, I hope you and I will have a similar conversation, and I will be able to say that the Just Trust is funding advocacy organizations in all 50 states. Like, that's what I would love to do in 10 years. But right now we have 7 states, and we call that our state by state campaign, right? And I just want to highlight one state, which is West Virginia. So I started funding West Virginia criminal justice advocates while I was at CZI. No criminal justice funder ever thought about West Virginia. And certainly nobody ever funded criminal justice reform efforts in the state. I saw a huge opportunity in West Virginia. I went to West Virginia and I met folks and I talked to folks, and I saw such passion and need for justice reform. And so I made the very first criminal justice advocacy grants to folks working in the state. And a couple of years later, those groups now have a really robust coalition that includes directly impacted advocates, that includes organizers, that includes legislative advocates, that includes advocates on the far left and advocates on the far right. We have the Americans for Prosperity in West Virginia is really important in this coalition and a really important leader. And through our funding, these leaders now have the resources to tackle this issue in a way that makes sense for West Virginia. They're not importing strategies from California or New York. They have the resources to work with lawmakers, work with other West Virginians, and tackle this issue in a way that makes sense. And that is, I think, the secret sauce to making incremental, durable change on criminal justice reform, which is what I think needs to happen. I don't think change overnight or too aggressive change is the right recipe here. We need durable, incremental change, and it needs to come from folks who live and breathe and understand their states, that have the resources to advance strategies that make sense for where they live. And I think that's really, really important, and that's how we fund. And so we're currently in 7 states. We're in Kentucky, West Virginia, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And we are investing in building out those advocacy coalitions and that infrastructure, and giving leaders in those states the resources to tackle this issue in a way that makes sense for Louisiana, that makes sense for Oklahoma.
Yeah, and myself working in drug policy reform, I very much get that. Being on the board at Marijuana Policy Project, we're focused on state level incremental change in drug policy, and that's what's been working for our organization since 1995.
That's right.
And I think so many people don't realize how nuanced each state is in terms of how it operates, how it takes things in. And so the fact that you are taking that really thoughtful state by state approach, finding places where there's big opportunity and perhaps people are ignoring, I think that's going to be tremendously impactful.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think yesterday I got an email from some of our folks in West Virginia, and they were kind of they're in the middle of the legislative session, and there's a lot of criminal justice related legislation. A lot of it is really bad, and a lot of it is really good. And the groups that we fund are working really, really hard and making progress on a couple of bills that I hope they will be able to pass. I also know that they're going to lose a couple of things, and the state is going to enact regressive criminal justice policy. And that's okay by me. As their lead funder, I expect that. I expect that in the journey to transform the justice system, advocates will be faced with significant challenges, and they won't win them all. But they will continue to make progress if they have sustained funding and if they have the flexibility to advance this issue, like you said, in the way that makes sense for that state. And they're able to build momentum and build their coalition of unlikely allies and really work with legislators to tackle this issue and create the political incentives for legislators to tackle this issue. All of that requires sustained funding.
A lot of dollars needed for that, absolutely. And I mentioned my work in drug policy, and I've certainly found in that work how much drug policy affects the criminal justice system just to an unbelievable degree. And I'm curious, in what you guys are doing, are you funding drug policy change as well?
Absolutely. We certainly are. That triangle, sorry to keep going back to the triangle, but in order to flip the triangle, right, and in order to create a more narrow pathway into incarceration, one of the key things that needs to happen is we need to address the fact that too many things are crimes. And of course, front and center in that conversation is the criminalization of drugs and the mass explosion of drug laws in this country. And I know you have been a very important leader in that effort. Some criminal justice reform funders don't see drug policy and drug law and decriminalization as an important strategy within our efforts to end mass incarceration. I just want to say I fundamentally and wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think that it is critically important to address the overcriminalization and the proliferation of especially drug laws in this country. We won't achieve our goals of transforming the justice system without that. However, we also can't only do that. We also have to address the fact that we do send people to prison for violent crimes, and we send them for a very long time, way too long, far and above what any other country does. And there's no public safety need for it. There's no evidence base that shows that sending people to prison for inordinate amount of time has any correlation with public safety. So I think now is the time we need to start having the hard conversation of demanding that our sentencing laws actually produce public safety outcomes. And so that's why I think the Just Trust firmly believes that we want to support advocates and advocacy ecosystems to address both over incarceration and alternatives to incarceration, but also to address the fact that we're sending people away for way too long.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir with me, but I think you stated that so well. You're such a good representative of this cause, and it's so clear what level your expertise is in it, and I really appreciate your words on drug policy reform as well. Like, it is beyond crucial, and like you said, not the only thing that we should do, but it's going to be it's a huge change maker in this space. And um, being in drug policy is what got me deeper into criminal justice reform. So I think it's probably the opposite for a lot of people, but
Well, no, but I mean, again, I think that is actually a really, really important point. What you just said is critically important, that sometimes for a lot of people, like, we have to take people on a journey. That's what advocacy is. That's what social change is. It's understanding and taking the time to understand where somebody comes from, what they think about these issues, and leading them on a journey to think differently, right? And for a lot of people in this country, they don't understand why we criminalize drug use. It just doesn't make sense to a lot of people, right? And so that, in a lot of ways, that can be the start of their journey into broader understanding of the criminal justice system and criminal justice reform. And that's some people approach it the other way. Some people are really moved by the second chances work, right? This idea that people, after they have been to prison and they are released, that they should be given the opportunity to thrive. They should be able to get jobs. They should be able to secure housing. But the reality is we have hundreds of legal barriers that prevent people with convictions to actually succeed, which greatly contributes to recidivism, of course. And so for a lot of people, that is the hook, right? They're like, "Ooh, that's a problem." And then that starts their journey into broader justice reform. So however you come to this issue, great. Some people don't like how much money we spend. That's fine too. Whatever your entry point into this issue, our job as advocates and funders is to help everybody go on their journey to understanding the full scope of this issue.
yeah, I mean, it impacts our society at such an incredible level. And for me, it's that, yeah, I feel privileged to not have had much direct contact with the system, but there's so many people who are humans just like me that this ruins their lives. And it breaks my heart. And it just is, like you said, it's not the America that we thought we lived in. And
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that, because it's something I'm just beginning to talk about. Which is, a couple of years ago, I actually had this epiphany moment. This is going to sound really silly, but it's absolutely true. I had this epiphany moment. I was sitting in a room with a group of formerly incarcerated leaders and their families, and we were just kind of chit-chatting and talking, and a woman was sharing her story where her brother was in and out of jail and he was currently in prison, and she was talking about how that really motivated her and to do this work and da 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 da. And I just had I was like, "Oh, that's me." And I realized at that moment, while I was working really hard to lift up the voices of people with direct experience with the criminal justice system, that I too was actually somebody with direct experience with the criminal justice system. My brother, my older brother, the one that was bullied horribly when he first moved to this country, he got on a wrong path at a young age. And, he would disappear for a long time. I had no idea where he was. Nobody ever told me. I was just a little girl. Turns out he was in jail. He went to prison. He has numerous felony convictions, and that he had a really hard time, and was I'll just say the criminal justice system is very, very harsh and horrible, and he experienced that firsthand. And I never talked about it. I literally buried it so deep because of the huge stigma that we have on jail and prison and being incarcerated. And I just kind of blocked it out of my purview. And I positioned myself through a lot of my career as somebody that doesn't have that experience, when in fact, I actually did have that experience. And so now that I've had this epiphany, I've started to really address this stigma and talk to my brother about his experience and really start to realize that I'm somebody who can talk about this issue and lead on this issue, both from my vast experience doing the work of criminal justice advocacy and philanthropy, but also as somebody who lived this. And I know what it's like to have a loved one cycle in and out of jail and prison and feel pretty hopeless as a result. So it was an interesting epiphany, and it certainly only happened a couple of years ago, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting to hear how you can get to that point, and then it sort of comes to mind that that's the case. And um, how has it been, having those deeper conversations with your brother about his experiences?
It's hard. Um, it's really hard because I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want him to have to talk about it if he doesn't want
Yeah,
to. Um, but at the same time, I realize it was a very important part of my childhood. And while I buried it deep for a long time, I would be lying if I didn't think that it was not a huge contributor to my work and what drove me and what hooked me in to this work. So I feel like I need to understand that and really piece it together.
well, you mentioned earlier during your time in New York, sort of just realizing some realities about the world and justice. And I'm sure that that was in the back of your mind when you did. It sounded like you had these rushes of empathy around it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I think so. But I honestly, like, it just didn't really come to fruition until only a couple of years ago.
Again, I'm just floored with your work at the Just Trust. I'm really excited to watch it evolve. And
Thanks, Jeff.
absolutely. And but I'd be remiss to not mention some of your other work. I saw that you're on the board of directors at Open House. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, yes, I'm so glad you asked. So, Open House is a San Francisco based nonprofit that really supports the aging LGBTQ plus community in San Francisco. So, I live in Asheville, North Carolina now. However, I only moved here in 2020 and I lived in the Bay Area in between San Francisco and Oakland for 20 years. And I'm a proud member of the LGBTQ community. And I really wanted to dedicate some of my time to giving back to that community in the Bay Area where, I really was kind of raised in a lot of ways in the Bay Area. And it will always feel like home to me. And the queer community in the Bay Area has given me a lot. And so I really wanted to give back. And I specifically wanted to serve on the board of an organization that works with our older generation. The LGBTQ plus seniors in San Francisco have endured a lot and have pioneered a lot, and are the reason why I am here today. In a lot of ways. And so I really wanted to give back and support Open House on the board and support them financially and to give everything I can in my spare time, which is not a whole heck of a lot, with
Yeah.
Blueberry, a 9-year-old, and this job.
Yeah. Well, it's a really great way to spend some of that excess time that's limited. And sounds like a really important organization. And I like that you highlighted sort of taking care of that organization that pushed the community forward.
That's right. Yeah, it is a really wonderful organization.
In life in general, what would you say motivates you?
Well, so my work at the Just Trust is really focused on an issue that I know you care a lot about, Jeff, which is why I'm super excited to talk to you more today, which is criminal justice reform. And this is an issue that I am deeply passionate about. It is absolutely, hands down, my life's work. I've been doing it my whole career, and I don't anticipate that changing. And really, the issue itself is very motivating for me. Every morning I wake up and I think about this issue, and I have the privilege of dedicating my work to it and the organization that I have built. And at the root of what motivates me about criminal justice reform, honestly, it might sound silly, but it's truly a belief in people, a belief that people can get better, do better, and really transform their lives no matter what we have done, and even at the worst moments in our life. I truly believe that to be possible. But I also believe that we need help sometimes, we need help to choose the right path. And I see the criminal justice system, I believe that it can actually help people to choose a different path and to get better and be better. But it's not doing that right now. So really, my work is really at the root of my work, and the motivation every morning to wake up and do this work, even on the really hard days, is a belief in people.
I really appreciate the way that you put that. Certainly, in my criminal justice work, I've thought a lot about people not being defined by their worst mistake, and so often being the victim of circumstance or discriminatory enforcement. People, just because they've had an experience in the system doesn't mean anything really about their character.
Right. Exactly. I believe that too.
So this is back to the beginning when we were talking about you going to New York. You mentioned your interest in acting and theater. Does any of that still exist? Are you still passionate about those areas at all?
I think, yes. Does it exist? No. Someday, Jeff, I'm going to get back on the stage. I don't think I have the time now, but I loved acting. I love performing. And I definitely think it's something I'm going to do again when I'm older. I could maybe see myself doing some community theater or whatever. I think it's going to come back into my life, but not right now. Do I love going to the theater? Yes. Every chance I get. I love opera. I love the symphony. I love theater. I love it all. So I just love performing arts.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan as well. I don't know if that many of the viewers know, but I do some acting as well, and have done years of acting classes, and it's honestly, aspects of it are therapeutic, and I've met a really great community through
I
it.
didn't know that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to be in some of the film projects that I'm producing, so coming to some sort of screen near you in the future.
Hey, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, keep me posted. That's so cool. Well, maybe if we're ever in the same city, we should go to the theater together.
Yes, and I'll also add that I think that, but storytelling is one of the most impactful things that exists, and so, and we've seen it work in all sorts of issues. um, I think in criminal justice reform it can be incredibly impactful. Movies like Just Mercy that highlight what people are going through, but also the work being done. So if you are interested in creating that type of impact storytelling, I'm interested in discussing that as well.
Oh, definitely. We should definitely talk about that. We have a grant portfolio that we call narrative and media, where we fund both. We understand that we need a more robust kind of journalism infrastructure to support different kinds of stories around justice reform, right? Rather than if it bleeds, it leads. Let's tell a different story that supports criminal justice reform. So that's one piece. But then the other piece is this broad category of narrative shift, where we really focus on narrative projects that can really help people understand that there is a different way to address crime and safety rather than punishment for punishment's sake. So we look at film projects. We actually supported the Just Mercy campaign. There's an organization called Represent Justice that's fantastic, that really does narrative work. And so we support other projects and are very open to collaborations. So we should talk.
Yeah, awesome. I'm looking forward to taking that conversation further, and I'm glad I brought up the acting and theater.
Yeah, me too. I love it.
And so, you've worked so much on this cause over these many years. Is there any particular story where you just saw like my work affected that change and it just really hit you?
Yeah. There's so many. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of one that I want to tell. Um, I think it's really. I think it's okay. Here's a story. I think it's really focused on what I talked a little bit about earlier. One of the drivers of moving me into philanthropy, which was this recognition that I worked at the ACLU and I had a budget, and I had I had program officers on my text, like I had access to funders. And during the Meet Your DA campaign, I was trying to really build a statewide coalition of organizations that were led by directly impacted folks, right? And really bring them to the table and work together to tackle this issue. And as I said, one of the challenges that they had is they didn't have funders on their speed dial, right? And so what I did is I went to my board at the ACLU and I asked for a lot more money. I asked for like $1 million more. and I was very clear. I was like, I plan, if you approve this budget request, I plan to give all of it away. and I made a very convincing argument, and they approved it. And I turned into a grant maker while I was still at the ACLU. And that coalition of organizations led by directly impacted leaders, some of the most important leaders in the criminal justice space, I made grants to those organizations. And I saw all of a sudden what happened as a result of that. Not only did they have more resources, all of a sudden they were on the attention of some of the big program officers, right? And now a lot of those organizations are on the grants docket of some of the largest criminal justice funders in the States. And so that really propelled me to go in. That one of the reasons propelled me to go into philanthropy, because I'm like, actually, I'm influential. I can, through my decisions and decisions on where to invest and whatnot, that I can actually really change the paradigm of philanthropy on this issue. And so, lo and behold, here we are today.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible, and it's really cool to see sort of the hints that sort of started creeping in as to where you were going, earlier on in your career.
Yep. Yeah.
I know you mentioned at least one person earlier, but has there been anyone in particular over your journey that you've considered a mentor?
Oh my gosh, so many mentors, so many mentors.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick Priscilla, who is a mentor, a more recent mentor, Priscilla Chan. I met her when I started at CZI, and she's the CEO of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And I've learned a lot from a lot of mentors around criminal justice reform, but what I learned from Priscilla is how to lead and how to be a CEO, which is, again, not something I ever thought I would do, be a CEO. That's a crazy thing. I mean, the CEOs are like different people than me, right? And now all of a sudden I'm a CEO. And from Priscilla, I really learned how to be a vulnerable, but visionary and pragmatic leader. Priscilla leads with so much vulnerability, and I think it's so important. And it's hard to be vulnerable when you're in the position of a CEO, but I have learned it is critically important to building trust and having mutual respect. And Priscilla also thinks really big, but is very pragmatic. And I have learned that. I am both idealistic and very pragmatic. And I've really learned a lot from her about how to lead and how to build an organization. And so I'm really grateful to her for many reasons. And she probably doesn't know that. I don't know if I've ever told her, but she's definitely taught me a lot about how to be a leader.
Yeah, no, that's great. I can imagine. And then, like you said, it was unique learning that you really needed at the time that have served you very well now and in the future.
Yeah. It's true.
If you'd like, you can ask me a question.
Yeah, I do want to ask you a question. I'm really curious. I've been asking a lot of people this question lately. What do you think is in 10 years? I just want to, like, if we're thinking ahead to 10 years, and looking at your passions, criminal justice reform, drug policy in particular, what do you want to see happen in 10 years time? And do you think it's possible to get there?
Yeah, that's a big question. What do I want to see happen in 10 years' time, and is it possible to get there? Well, first off, I would be very disappointed if we don't have full-scale cannabis decriminalization, at the least in the 10 years, ideally some federal level of legalization. And the same with psychedelics. I would think within the decade, at least specific ones were, seeing MDMA getting through FDA trials to be treatment for PTSD. So I really want to see the growth of using these incredible substances we have for treatments and expanding the research greatly. And along with all of that, I would hope that, as drugs become decriminalized, that we will have a dwindling population in our criminal justice system, in detention. And those are kind of my two biggest things. Like, there's so many aspects that I care about and I work on, like you mentioned, fair chance hiring, and but the idea that significant drug policy reform will bring less prison population, more research, better treatments, and a healthier, more cured world. It's the word.
Mm-hmm.
I envision a more peaceful world in this space. When we have drug decriminalization, when we have less people incarcerated. And so that's what I would hope for the next 10 years, at least, that we're making progress on that. Do I think it's possible? Yes, I do think it's possible. And I do tend to be,
Me too.
I'm glad to hear that. I do tend to be optimistic, but I feel like for all the terrible things going on in our world and all the terrible things in our criminal justice system, there are so many positive things happening. There's so many people like you that are working to make our world a better place. And that's what I try to highlight through this show, is all the people that are the answer. And I think that there's a lot more people that are pushing us in the right direction than the wrong direction. So I believe in that future.
I do too, Jeff. I really appreciate that. And I think we can get there. It's not easy, but I agree. I think there's a lot more people, and certainly a growing number of people in this country that are realizing exactly what you just said, that these laws, particularly our drug laws, are just not serving any useful purpose. And in fact, they're doing more harm than good. And there is a pathway. There's people, there's not a clear line of who supports and who opposes. This stuff is across the aisle. We have supporters across geographies. We have supporters across political spectrums, urban and rural. This stuff is widely understood, and now it's time to really dig in and demand that our elected leaders start addressing what everybody feels and wants. It doesn't mean that it's easy, but I definitely think it's possible, if we have the philanthropic backbone to support it. So
yeah, and I look forward to you continuing to be a big part of that, and to continuing to grow and scale the ability to create that change. And this last big question that I ask is, one I ask everyone, and there's certainly a lot of obvious directions you could go given your work. But I like that you just asked me about like the 10 years in the future. So something that would take tons of work, decades in the future. But imagine if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world. What would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate? So you could skip that time frame.
Yeah. So I tackle that question in a lot of different ways. Like, my pragmatic brain is like, this is what's possible, but I'm going to think really big here, since you've invited me to do
Right,
that.
and we talk incremental change a lot, right?
I know,
So it's like
I know.
nuances.
I want to think big. So if I could like snap my fingers, and skip ahead in time a long time, what I would like to see is the paradigm shift that I think we need to make in our criminal justice system, which is moving from a system that is kind of undergirded by punishment, incapacitation, and those things, to a system that is undergirded by liberty, evidence-based safety, right? And healing, repairing. And I know that sounds like really hand wavy and fluffy, but I actually really believe that if we were to shift the goals and the foundation of our criminal laws and our criminal justice system from punishment to safety and healing, that we would have huge ripple effects that could be seen across the whole spectrum. We would see communities that are more stable, families that are more stable. Families that are kept together. I think we would certainly see a reduction in crime because, of course, our justice system would have to prove that its actions increase safety. And we would see folks actually able to get the support they need to find true redemption after harm is committed, and to be able to lead a productive life again, to truly transform. And so I think at the foundation of that is we have to achieve a paradigm shift in why we have the criminal justice system and what we expect it to do as the funders of that system. And so that's the paradigm shift that I'd like to see. And I think it's a long way away, but I think we get there by that incremental approach. We get there by telling new stories and helping expand what people think is possible. And we really start to shift the goals of the justice system, again, from punishment to safety and healing.
It's a beautiful vision, and one that I hope that we're on a path to. And as I've mentioned, I love what you're working on. I know that the listeners and viewers will be inspired. How can people best support you, your impact, the Just Trust?
It's a good question. I think that it depends on who you are. I would say if there's anybody listening that has financial means and wants to get involved in this issue, that is a really important way to get involved. I think folks with influence, the ability to have conversations with elected officials, the ability to have conversations with other decision makers that have platforms on social media, those sorts of things, that have storytelling platforms, that there's a way for everybody to get involved. But I do think that I do think that the first way to truly get involved in this issue is to find that hook, right? Find the thing that really resonates with you, because this is a big issue and it's a scary issue. And it takes a journey of understanding to really fully feel comfortable getting fully involved, like you and I are. And so do the reading and do the studying and learn about this issue and learn what your hook is, and then start yourself on that journey. But also folks can go to our website, we're thejusttrust.org, and shoot us a note if there's a way that we can help you get involved, or if you want to get involved with our organization. That's why we exist.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for being here, and for your tremendous work. And I look forward to working together to create a better criminal justice system.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate you having me, and it's been a wonderful conversation, and let's do it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with friends, and reviews or subscriptions on your favorite platforms go a long way to help the show grow. I want to share these incredible people and their remarkable work with as many others as possible. Thanks for your support. For more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.